Hello, my name is Bill and this is SixRounds Studio. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to actually template out and cut or shape the side panels on this 1905 Ithaca Double Shotgun restoration. One of the problems that I had early on trying to recreate this shape is that when I received the shotgun, these side panels were, one side was completely destroyed, it wasn't there, and the left side had some remnants of that side panel still left. So what I've done is I had a really good photo of the left side panel that was still in good shape. Again, it had been sanded, so it had lost some of its shape, but there was enough of it left intact that I was able to build somewhat of a template off from it. Now, I had this picture, and what I did is I sized the photo so that it was exactly the size as the shotgun itself. So by doing that, I was able to pull some dimensions. And not only did I pull the dimensions, but what I was able to do is use the datum point, which on this shotgun, the datum point is literally the back of the receiver. Okay, that's also your recoil surface. So using the back of the receiver, I chose the screw that was in the bottom left of the receiver, and using that screw, using that center hole, I was able to take this straight edge that is square, and I bumped it up against the back of that receiver in the drawing. And then I drew a straight line all the way back. So that way I have a reference point, and I drew it straight back to where the panel that was left came together, or the pointy part of the panel. So by drawing that line back to the pointy part, it then gave me a reference that I could use in order to transfer this over onto the wood itself. So with that line drawn, I then repeated that line from the center of the hole back in that same direction, and then I had my pointy point. Continuing to take dimensions, I looked at where the checkering point ended, and then measured back to where it intersected that line that I drew, and that line from the pointy part of the checkering to where this line intersects is 1/2 inch. So I double checked to make sure that's exactly what was happening, and it is. So that way I got a good sense that what I drew on the photograph translates pretty clearly back into the applique that I've drawn on. I also, this is the template that I made from the 1925, and I mentioned in my last video that gun manufacturers don't generally tend to make huge changes from years to years or models to models. So I overlaid this, and I noticed that the curves are pretty close. So I know that even though this larger template from the larger gun or larger pointy panel on the 25, if I go into the smaller section of the template from that gun, it nearly is identical and matches almost identical to the smaller part of this template. So they used they used similar geometry to do it. I then took a French curve, okay, and I overlaid the French curve, and lo and behold, that French curve matches the curve on the template. And I did the same on the bottom, and I found a section of the French curve on the bottom that was pretty close to this original template. Now that doesn't make it all exactly perfect, but it gets me in the general direction, and it makes me feel pretty good about how we're going to transfer this. So when I measured from the datum or the receiver back to the end of the point of the panel that was original to this gun, it was 2 inches. So measuring back on that same line 2 inches, I was able to get where that pointy end terminates. In the last video I mentioned the shadow lines or the defining light lines here, and I drew a line, so I'm needing to start there, and then of course this one down at the bottom. So those become the wider dimensions of the edges of that panel. Now those are going to shape back into the rest of the gun stock. So even though the pointiest part of it is going to be fairly narrow, when we begin to curve that out, it'll appear wider to the eye. So using the French curve, and then using those parts that I found to match, and to be probably the most pleasing, I can then come back and draw that line, flip it over to the section that is the bottom, and it follows that light line and it comes up to the pointy part, and I draw that, and I have a panel that should closely replicate what was there. And then when I overlay this, it appears to be the same panel. So this gives me lines of reference that I can begin to shape this to. Now, this at some point becomes the artist's discretion. So even though I'm trying to replicate this, I'm replicating it to something that really doesn't exist anymore. It's me sort of using the dimensions, using typical geometry, and trying to recreate this. Now I'm going to start to shape this, but using some artist's discretion, I'll begin to see, what it looks like, and then alter that shape to get it to be as aesthetic or aesthetically pleasing as it really should be. And that's just going to come from years and years of me doing this stuff. All right. So that's how I arrived here. Let's now begin to cut away this material and shape this so that it begins to look like a pointy side panel that would have been on this 1905 Ithaca. So I don't go too far afield and begin to use too much artist license, I've got the 1925 Ithaca here, so I can reference back to how they apply those curves into the panel and how they blend it off. So I get a much better sense of where I need to be as I'm sort of carving away the excess material. So if you can see it, I don't know if you can see it, but here's that bottom line and here's that top curve. I'm just going to begin to remove material. Now what I want to be careful of is I'm doing this, that I'm not hitting the original stock. do any more repairs to that, then I absolutely end up needing to. The less the better. So I'm just carving away this excess material, and I'm bringing it back to the pencil line. All right. If you've been on the channel long enough and watched enough videos, I've spoken about the direction of grain, or the direction that wood is most happy to be cut. So when I'm cutting it this way, it wants to chip away. It wants to, the fibers want to break. So I'm being forced to cut this from this direction. The wood's happy. So our job is to make the wood happy. Begin to sound a little bit like Bob Ross here, but we want happy wood. Unhappy wood will cause all kinds of problems, and all the work that you've done to this point becomes useless if you end up with these huge chips that you absolutely cannot do anything with. So hopefully you're seeing the panel begin to reveal itself here a little bit. Yeah, be careful, Bill. There's a curve here that has to come up. So I've got to figure out, even though the panel told me that it had to be that long, because they sanded so much material away in this area, I may very well have to shorten that up so that it blends into what's left of the wood. I was building gun stocks, or I was designing gun stocks for Ruger firearms years ago, doing much of what you're seeing here, and I had a guy come up to me and say, "How do you do that? How do you know where to remove material?" And my sort of glib response was, "Well, I remove everything that doesn't look like a gun stock." And there is truth to that. But in some ways, I think that just comes from years of experience, years of exposure. There are custom stock makers who I envy. They are so good at what they do. And I don't ever claim to be their caliber, but I've been carving long enough that I certainly have my own aesthetic sense, my own sense of where the lines need to terminate and how we need to blend them into something that looks like a gun stock. American walnut, if it's not too gnarly or too burly, is really a sweet wood to carve. It pairs away really nicely. Take a nice sharp chisel. I changed chisels, by the way. That other one was a little too dull. If you have a really nice sharp chisel, it really does cooperate very, very well. And I've got this positioned for you, for the camera, which doesn't give me as much control as I might like to have. But I really want you all to see how this unfolds. When you get to the end of the wood, you want to start using a little bit of a slicing action so it doesn't want to chip away and break away at the end. I've had several viewers comment on how I wear Band-Aids a lot. Well, working with wood a lot, the wood really dries out my skin and causes my skin to crack, especially in the wintertime. It's not so bad now in the summertime when the humidity's higher, but in the wintertime, my skin cracks pretty easily. But here's the other way that I keep having to wear Band-Aids, because these chisels are sharp, and as hard as I try to avoid hurting myself, if you do this long enough, trust me, you're going to end up hurting yourself. A bunch of my good friends are mechanics and YouTubers as well, and they're always showing their injuries when a wrench slips. If you're going to work with your hands, you're going to get hurt. So all you boys and girls who make a life sitting around on a desk and a computer, maybe you'll get carpal tunnel, I don't know. That is starting to look really, really nice. Using a curved chisel, trying to create that undercut that is in the original, or in the 1925. I'm trying to bring it as close to the original wood as I can, while at the same time not touching the original wood. I've said many times, craftsmanship is a game of patience. Restoration is a game of patience. If you're a get-her-done kind of guy or gal, art, craftsmanship, restoration is probably not the career for you. And perhaps equally said, if you're the customer and you're somebody that's asking for a custom anything or a restoration anything, it's also imperative on you that you be equally patient. Good craftsmanship, good work, it takes time. You know, we're paring away small amounts at a time. So what I'm using is this rubber sanding block, and it has a radius on it, and I have different sizes. And then the upper part is where I grip it with my hand. I can wrap my sandpaper around it, and it gives me some really fine control, not only of the sandpaper, but how I create these radiuses. It allows me to get very, very close to that original wood without heading deep into the wood. So we have the final shaping down. It really, really looks super. And what I need to do is actually shrink its depth down closer to that 15 thousandths that we had talked about in the last video. If you haven't seen that last video, that's when we do the initial Bridgeport milling on this. You may want to go back and see that. Exciting stuff. It's a little tall right now, but it looks really good. It's pretty damn stunning. So I want to bring this down so that I get that shape in this area here a little bit nicer, a little bit closer. This is really looking nice. All my sanding blocks, this is a maple block, but all of my sanding blocks, even the ones that I put a rubber pad on it, they're all milled flat on the Bridgeport, which helps me control control the flatness or the levelness of anything I'm sanding. I also round or soften these edges so that I don't dig hard edges in. I'm using 100 grit paper. The paper's aggressive enough that I can move wood, but not so aggressive that I'm leaving huge, deep scratches that I need to get out later. I try to change directions so that I'm not. You're going to get a certain amount of rocking in the paper when you do it in the block. So I try to change directions often so that I'm minimizing that rocking having any kind of an effect on how flat we want something to be. This is why I like to do this before I get into doing the metal, because I've reached over and I've touched the metal a couple times, left a few small scratches, which is going to happen. And I don't mind putting those small scratches in now because I have to polish the metal after. Alright, that first panel is ready to go. I'm going to wipe it down with some mineral spirits and let you see what it looks like. The mineral spirits will help blend it into the rest of the stock and give you a better sense of what that looks like. The reason I'm using the mineral spirits is because it'll evaporate and won't leave a residue. All right, let's roll this over and do it all over again.